Thank you, Rasika Ajotikar, for giving me this opportunity. And I also would like to thank Navtej Purewal for again engaging with my work, and we had interactions around the themes. Yeah, so today, title I have made a bit of change, so I would like to read the full title, and that would be Idea of Cultural Justice, a theme that I am working on for some time, cultural justice at the crossroads in India. Before I begin, I would like to set the background. And so recently, one of my friends from Kerala, he was telling me this story, Binod Kalidasan, and he was telling me this story about tribe from Kerala. And the tribe was trying to escape slavery. So basically, this is the Adia community tribe from Kerala, and the tribe was trying to escape the whole slavery system. But time and again, they were unable to escape. He was told by the owner, the tribe was told by the owner of the couple many times. You have many interpretations of this, myth, in which the person was told by the owner that yes, we will let you free and you can walk down, you can just run down to your dream country. One day, he escaped in the dream to be hacked down by the master. He decided that he will escape in the day, but found that the spirit of the master sitting there, even in the death situation. The myths have many interpretations. In his novel, Mavalya Mantram, KG Baby set them free to escape slavery and set up a world based on equality and peace. So this you have one myth, but again, that shows certain kinds of limitation, but also certain kinds of potentials. Hope I am audible. Everything is clear. Okay, great. Another story that I've heard in Bihar, also narrated by George Gerson, who was a folklorist, but also administrator from that region, will discuss about the ghost of the white sahibs. So you have many ghosts of the white sahibs, and they will be called Mumin Sahib. So those spirits would come in their dreams. Many times, those local community will see these white sahibs in their dreams. People would be infected by.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Sorry, could you please mute yourself?
Am I visual?
So sorry, Brahma, about that.
No, that's all right. Yeah.
I'm just gonna.
Oh, sorry for interrupting, sir. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I was telling another story from Bihar where you have a presence of a strong presence of white sahibs, and those sahibs will appear in the local dreams.
Am
so
I audible?
when we think. What is happening, Rasika?
I am just gonna ask this person to. Yes.
Okay, so I was telling about another. Yeah, thank you. So I was telling you about another story from Bihar where you have a strong presence of white sahibs. So this ghost will appear in dream of the local communities, and many times. So what will happen that even people will hear that white sahib is coming, they will leave the whole village. They will run away from somewhere else. They will run away from that village. So what I'm trying to say that how the presence of colonialism was very strong, and it had a strong psychic and kinetic presence in that sense. The British left with their ghost, but the dream you have whole British ghost, white sahibs, and British left with, but their ghost remains. They are still possess people in which they speak many times accented English. And what I'm trying to say that how you have several layers of these kinds of imagination. So first, a story you have heard from Kerala where the person does not have even escape in the dream. Even the person is trying to escape from slavery in death, the person is not able to escape. And that shows that how imagination works and how many times imagination can itself be very, very oppressive in that sense. Now we would like to see, I would like to show few videos, and after that we will come to the theorization. So I'm just trying to set the background of that whole idea of the cultural justice and injustice that I'm trying to go to discuss in this talk. video, that clip that you are going to see now is a kind of Upari performance from Tamil Nadu. The performance was organized by Paranjit, again a filmmaker and a kind of again great initiator in many fields of the culture. So he's now, so lament songs, this is a very popular lament song. Upari is a popular lament song from Tamil Nadu, where Dalit communities, generally Dalit communities, will sing on the occasion of death ceremony. When you have death ceremony, they will be called and sung. So you have similar kinds of Dalit tradition in Rajasthan and many parts of India, where largely the Dalit communities will be given contract to cry, come and cry, to come and weep, to come and lament. And this is, and how now Paranjit or that kinds of initiative is trying to provide a new kinds of articulation to Upari, to provide a certain kinds of dignified presence of Upari. And this is what you can see in this platform. Okay, I will share another video. Just I'm trying to give you the larger context in which we can place this question of cultural justice. Now we have another group. They also think that they have witnessed cultural injustices in their history. And they're also trying to make this claim of that how much injustice they have faced. And therefore they are trying to bring justice in a different ways. And here you have the sample examples. Yeah, Rasika, are you saying something?
No, no.
Okay, sorry. So quite new kind of music has emerged in contemporary India, and now people are turning Hindutva pop. I have called disc jockey Hindutva, and they are the whole music and songs are composed around these themes of injustice, that how certain communities has done injustice with me, and here songs becomes a form of revenge and form of certain kinds of you are going to provide justice to the larger masses, and in which we can think about the larger field of the Hindutva pop and the songs like that. Sorry, we don't have so much time. So what I will do that I will just screen some more videos, and after that, yeah, we come to the.
मानव
can you see this video, or you can still see that video?
Yes, we can see this.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so this is a song on Bhima Koregaon, where you will find that a certain kinds of ideology is clearly getting challenged in a quite a strong way. And here, like, the name of courage is Bhima Koregaon, and name of that blood is Bhima Koregaon, and that, like, the songs will go on to, again, it is trying to envision a certain kinds of, like, idea of the justice, the idea of the society. They're like, they're trying to create their own kinds of imaginative world for different kinds of lenses. One more, and after that, I will get back. This is a video from Ranchi, where, like, Adivasi communities are participating in Sarhul Festival, thanks to my student Subed Kunwar, who is working on these themes. And where, again, we find a certain kinds of articulation of identity, articulation of justice that is happening in a kinds of a spatial and a musical piece. Yes. So you have seen, like, clearly remarkable, like, 3-4 sides in which we can see that all these communities are trying to make certain kinds of justice claims or certain kinds of cultural claims on history, on presence, on a space, and all these things are happening. So coming from, like, I got real cultural jolt. Let me start with my own personal life. This was got real cultural jolt while listening to the songs of Gadar and Jannat Mandi from Telangana. Coming from very feudal and largely masculine cultural background of northern India, I could imagine revolutionaries coming as tigers. So that was my image of the revolutionary. That because he's a revolutionary singer, he will sing about revolutionary. But the way I could imagine about, like, songs, I was thinking that maybe revolutionary will come as a tiger, revolutionary will come as a lion, revolutionary will come as a certain kinds of other kinds of masculine figures. It was difficult for me to imagine that heroes are coming as a motherless puppies. So in that Gadar and, like, Jannat Mandi songs, what jolted me that, like, how now that, like, revolutionary coming as a motherless puppies, they are coming as a street dogs. They were coming as chicken eggs. They were coming as a crows. And that has really, like, made me to think that how Gadar and Jannat Mandi as a singer and performers were able to subvert the whole idea of the symbols and metaphors in a completely opposite way. I was shocked to hear when my favorite word cuckoo, like, again, we have a lot of appreciation for cuckoo, but being compared with a parasitic class of jamindars. So cuckoo in the songs will come as a jamindars. And that was a kind of jolt I was getting, that how when you are just changing the kind, making a certain kinds of transformation, then you will find that how cultural justice are getting delivered in different ways. Cultural violence, injustice done at the cultural planes have been increasingly recognized in the recent scholarship. I have different kinds of work that is coming and various forms. So for example, one can talk about cultural genocide, one can talk about cultural domination, one can talk about humiliation, disrespect, cultural appropriation, non-recognition, And there are many categories that one can talk about that when we are talking about cultural injustice, then what are the kinds of categories we can bring under like idea of the cultural justice. Cultural justice in this, like in my work, embarks from the point that one's understanding of justice is deeply embedded in the idea of the culture. Because how we think about justice, it largely depends on that why, which cultures, what was your kinds of exposure to culture, and how you discuss. And you have two brilliant studies, like Carl Ginsberg study on trial of witches in Europe, that how when witches were getting tried, they were not able to understand the whole justice system. They were just making some different kinds of points. Same way we can think about Chauri Chaura incident that happened in Gorakhpur in India, and same thing happened with the culprits, so-called culprits, where they were not able to understand the whole justice system. They were making some different arguments, but again, they have to go through the trials. The paper attempts to theorize an idea of justice that not only exposes cultural injustices, but also offers alternatives. Beyond the question of law and redressal mechanism, it asks us to think cultural justice in terms of movement. And therefore, I'm saying that not necessarily I'm trying to theorize this idea of the cultural justice in relation to law, in relation to certain kinds of redressal mechanism. I would like to see the kinds of cultural movement. And therefore, education and cultural programs becomes quite essential to think about this idea of the cultural justice. An idea of justice that not only compensates land and the lost economy, but also the memories, senses, and imagination encoded on them. This is important because social and political conflict is not just an argument about regions and rationals. It is also about a battleground of symbols that we are entering into and we are continuously fighting. I aim to foreground the notion of cultural justice that may work both as a transformative force to address the problem of cultural hierarchies and violence as a part of the movement towards new culture. The question of redistribution and recognition, and I think even Rasika was trying to introduce this session, then she was saying that how to think about culture in class. And therefore, I would like to come to that topic and also try to situate my own idea of the cultural justice within this kinds of framework. So question of redistribution and recognition, when I'm talking about redistribution, it means I'm talking about class. When I'm talking about recognition, then of course it is about the culture that one can talk about. So question of redistribution and recognition has figured prominently in the recent discourses of culture and aesthetics. I would like to pick up my thread from the very first lecture delivered by Professor Dwight Conquergood on the concern of rescuing class-based analysis from the cultural term. And that was his topic, he was talking about that how to rescue class-based analysis from the cultural term that is happening. Both the perspectives are presented in his paper. Both the perspectives were presented as both are opposed to each other. The question of recognition and question of redistribution are opposed to each other. This division has been a persistent concern for me for some time. With the similar concerns, I have tried to bring culture and labor together in my previous work, though I too remain critical of the post-colonial studies and the sum of the specific turn of the cultural studies. I do not see this concern of redistribution and recognition in opposition, especially in a condition when labor is indeed making a cultural turn in the reform of services. Both the categories have been closely linked in the Indian class-based society, because I feel that many times the people who are trying to make this division also not coming to this Indian context, because in Indian context, I don't see that division was really there. Both the categories have been closely linked in Indian class-based society because labor was already embodied in the notion of service. On the light note, let me make a fun. On the light note, I can proudly say that we had a service economy before the advent of neoliberal market. Laborer as a performer may be a new category to think in a neoliberal economy, but the figure was already there in Indian society as a sevak, as a chakor, one who can dance on your tune, one who cannot have the independent time. If you're thinking about Shudra, if you're thinking about that kinds of service classes. Soumyavrat Chaudhary, in his paper, rightly termed the process as a global Sudrafication of aesthetics and politics in relation to labor, service, and performance. So it is not that we are just witnessing the globalization of local culture, we are also witnessing a Sudrafication of the global culture, in put the other way around. In Justice in Drafts, Nancy Fraser called this dichotomy between redistribution and recognition as a false opposition of post-socialist common sense. And I have almost a similar view. No doubt these divisions are still crucial to understand the idea of the transformative politics and claim making. In contemporary discourse, it appears that the question of recognition becomes more important than the question of redistribution. And that has been a kind of whole like criticism of this idea that there has been a cultural turn. As Fraser has remarked, some celebrates the shift from redistribution to recognition as if a struggle for distributive justice were no longer relevant. Others bemoan dissenting of class, which they equate with the decline of egalitarian economic claims, as if a struggle for racial and gender justice were merely cultural kinds of turn. As Fraser identifies, it appears to be either of this choice. Either you are think about class or you think about culture. Fraser shows that how both works together to produce injustices. And that is the crux, that is the point I'm trying to bring here. That let us think through injustices in which both the categories can come together. And Fraser also suggests that we should aim instead to identify the emancipatory dimension of both problematics and to integrate them in a single comprehensive framework. Though I am not really interested in bringing them together or making a single kinds of comprehensive framework, but I would like to see them in a dialogue between the distribution of the labor and the distribution of the sensible, a dialogue between rearrangement of politics and rearrangement of body and spaces, a dialogue between culture and labor to expose the injustices and see the potentials in that sense. So why I'm bringing these points here? One can ask that why I'm bringing these points here. I'm bringing these points to foreground the notion of cultural justice that is intricately linked to the question of redistribution as well as recognition. For me, cultural turn is not the problem. The problem is that we have not turned it enough. And that is the point I would like to argue, that let us make a more radical cultural turn to the field of the culture. And then I think this crisis that we keep discussing about, whether it's a question of class or question of culture, will come more closer. Therefore, cultural justice makes a fundamental claim that a theory of culture has to be the core of any theory of oppression and hierarchy, whether it is a question of class, it is a question of gender, or the question of displacement, or the kinds of development that we can talk about. The paper has three main aims. First, situating the significance of cultural justice in the larger discourse of cultural movement, beyond the assimilating frameworks of cultural differences, which many times we celebrate, multiculturalism and politics of inclusiveness. Second, how cultural justice is different from other forms of justice, such as social and political justice. Thirdly, why do the question of cultural justice becomes increasingly significant in the light of cultural mobilization of the right-wing politics. I'm only sticking to the question of cultural justice in a caste-based society in India in this paper. I have planned to discuss the question in relation to indigenous community in another paper that I will work on in the future. So drawing from the works of Antonio Gramsci, Jyotiba Phule, B.R. Ambedkar, and Bell Hooks, and others, the question I also ask is whether cultural justice is a question of niti, law, or policy, or the cultural justice is a question of nyaya, proactive formation that is continuously getting constituted. I would like to place it as a nyaya, a proactive formation that aims to make justice sensible and doing justice to culture, even it has gone against the niti, that is the law there. Broadly, the theorization has two aims. First, which is critical to expose the underneath layers of cultural injustices in forms of cultural hegemony, cultural appropriation, and different kinds of other categories. Second, it also has the aim to offer an alternative and positive idea of cultural justice. And I would like to talk here, I draw from also the works of Andrew Ross, who suggests that cultural justice refers to three things: doing justice to culture. So he is talking about three things: doing justice to culture, pursuing justice through cultural means, and seeking justice through cultural claims. So I'm taking these three kinds of framework to analyze my larger field of the materials here. Taking these three considerations across, I am making aiming to theorize the idea of the cultural justice in Indian and South Asian context plans. So what embarks on the fundamental claim embodied in the famous phrase, you must have heard that phrase, that justice should not only be done, but should manifestly and undoubtedly be seen to be done. So how it has to be shown? It has to be seen to be done. That statement marks an inherent performative and effective attribute of justice to be considered as a cultural justice. The sense of justice lies in the embodied acts that have to be performed, but that also has to be felt at the corporeal level. One part of justice, and therefore, when I was giving examples of presence of the coast, colonial coast in Bihar, even the British have left. They still are able to get these kinds of ghost out of spirit in their corporeal presence, in their corporeal kinds of manifestation, and that shows that colonial hangovers are that kinds of culture is still not there, still not over. So one part of justice is a performative that appears in the rhetorical language of judiciary and its ritualized action. What a scholars usually term it is a legal aesthetics. So when we talk about legal aesthetics, then we talk about largely legal aesthetics asks us to consider the way justice is deliberated. How even if you have a very nicely done this two kinds of justice has been delivered, but what was the gesture of the judges? How did the justice? What was the language was spoken? And we have many examples where maybe there was a nice good justice, good kinds of justice that has come, but again the language, the examples that have been quoted were not really great. And therefore we can talk about so one form of thinking about this idea of the cultural justice about thinking in terms of legal aesthetics. Legal aesthetics also asks us to consider the way justice is deliberated. And we have another great scholar from performance studies, Dwight Conquergood, and he argued that all the interlocking rituals of criminal punishment, arrest, detention, interrogation, trial, conviction, incarceration, and execution are performed so that citizen can see that justice is done. The whole idea is that not only justice has been delivered, but justice has to be shown to be done, that one should feel that yes, justice has been deliberated and justice has been done. But this also brings to the retributive model of the justice, an institutionalized crime and punishment model of justice that you have a new argument that is coming largely from Truth and Reconciliation Committee from Africa, where they are trying to move from from retributive justice, they are trying to move to this whole idea, the restorative justice systems, where justice is going to provide more healing kinds of idea or healing kinds of justice systems. The second part of justice lies in effect, in the feeling that carries the sensible and therapeutic aspect of justice. It may appear like a restorative model of justice. That means justice must be felt. Unless justice is not felt, whoever has not got the justice, or maybe thinking that it has not been done properly, they may again become violent. There is a whole sense that again going to get whole idea that justice can get completely reversed. Taking capabilities approach of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, I argue that cultural justice is a cultural right of every citizen, but cultural right can be problematic in terms of hierarchical society like India, because one right usually leads to the violation of other rights. And you have a lot of things that people are saying that my Brahminical ideology is getting subverted, they're getting challenged. So how culture, if you're thinking just about cultural rights in very neutral term in Indian context, then that is going to be very, very problematic in that sense. But yeah, so it underlines that justice itself has to be sensitized in its body, action, and pronouncement. Cultural justice is often subsumed under the social justice, as they both deal with the question of power, inequality, and hegemony. Cultural justice, however, offers a more precise lens for which to consider the cultural dimension of injustices. It aims to explore the possibility of cultural justice to embrace the problems and challenges that either do not get addressed in the existing notion of social and political justice, or they get relegated in its broader analysis. So many times they will say that, oh, this is just about culture. This is not about social. So when we discuss about the social identity and things, the larger framework still remains to work through the idea of the social justice, not through the idea of the cultural justice. The contemporary discourse around art, culture, and justice can be broadly seen in three important framings. Cultural rights and justice are largely used in the liberal multiculturalism as a matter of the rights and autonomy of the cultural groups in narrow sense. So many times in Europe, you have whole idea of the cultural justice that is getting enacted, and where this whole sense idea is that we are going to produce the multicultural society. So let us respect each other. And that is the way cultural justice is getting enacted. But I think that is a very, I would say, very liberal framework of cultural justice, in which Europe or larger Euro-American kinds of framing is trying to think about cultural justice. If we are trying to think about more third world countries or the kinds of society that I'm discussing, then I think cultural justice need to make it larger, really a kind of political departure. It is also crucial to theorize cultural justice when cultural injustices are increasingly recognized in the scholarship. So like day and night, we are witnessing the media violence. Day and night, we are witnessing the narrative violence. And therefore, unless we are not recounting, unless we are not counting, or unless we are not theorizing this whole idea, the field of the narrative violence, I don't think how we can think about that like a very contemporary scenario or the contemporary scene that we are witnessing in our own society. Third, a resistance against cultural hegemony also asks us to recognize the new forms of cultural production that are happening in the sphere of culture and spiritual domains, but cannot be captured to an economic and social lens. So you have seen like the work of Paranjit, you have seen that how like Adivasi communities in Jharkhand, they are trying to create their own space, their own movement, their own identity. So unless you don't have that kinds of telling, how we are going to evaluate these kinds of like the larger kinds of artistic and cultural production that is happening in our context. I also aim to theorize a broader cultural phenomena in the field of art and culture, where oppressed communities are seeking to carve a new space to enact justice. The theory of cultural justice would aim to recognize the role of art, aesthetics, and cultural production for emancipation of individuals and communities. That can only happen with the radical constitution of the art and cultural sphere. Fourth, cultural justice would be a conscious attempt to sensitize the dead and desensitize a sphere of the Hindu caste society. A society cannot make a moral claim of equality and imagine justice when they are desensitized at every level. If Savarna considers the cultural hegemony by perpetuating myths, symbols, and cultural assimilation, cultural justice is an act of resisting this process through the cultural means. Last but not least, also social justice and economic justice are based on equality, and cultural justice based on the. So when we think about that, like if we're thinking about social justice, if you're thinking about economic justice, then the sense of equality becomes the embodiment that how to think about the economic justice. But whenever we think about like a cultural justice, then difference becomes the basic marker that how to do certain kinds of justice despite of recognizing the differences. So you have other kinds of so I can go to discuss about so two modes of cultural justice that I'm trying to theorize. One that is coming through the counter culture or critical approach to existing culture. So theorization of cultural justice not necessarily need to underline the field of cultural injustices in the specific context, as a culture always makes a particular kinds of cultural claims. So for example, and I don't want to go again to show you the photo, but if you remember, then like many times the way Adivasis are getting punished, the way Muslims get punished, the way Dalits are getting punished, even the form of punishment remains quite different. And so many times and I have figure to show from Operation Green Hunt, and what you see in that figure that Adivasi women are getting killed in this Operation Green Hunt, and she's getting hanged from the pole as she's an animal, as she's a beast in that sense. But again, because that is coming through the cultural groups in which we have imagined this idea of the injustices, and therefore this also shows that how to even this idea the punishment or injustices always makes a certain kinds of cultural specific kinds of nuances, cultural specific kinds of manifestation. So how idea of the cultural justice can capture these kinds of this idea of either we can talk about cultural domination, non-recognition, or certain kinds of the idea of the respect. Also, so I would like to discuss more about, so one is the kinds of critical approach to how to think about cultural justice through the critical approaches, where you are going to approach more a kinds of more a kinds of critical approach to think about this idea of the cultural justice. Second is that a movement for a new culture, and this idea of the movement for a new culture has been very much embodied in when Gramsci is talking about the production of new culture, that how we are going to discuss about new culture. Ambedkar wanted to make a cut into the history, that we want to just make a cut into the history, so we can also imagine a newer space. We can we are not going to engage with your space. We are not going to engage with the given space. We are going to mark clear kinds of departure, and that way we can think about new culture production, movement for a new culture. So cultural justice is not only about creating a counter discourse against the prevalent forms of cultural injustices only. So this is an important step. Cultural justice is also a movement towards new culture in both Ambedkarite and Gramscian sense that I can talk about. And so you have Gramsci observed that, and I would like to come to that point. Second, one point that I would like to discuss, and but I'm not going to elaborate that much, but again, that can come during the question answer session, when they all are coming to this idea of the education, where education becomes a cultural program. For Gramsci, Education becomes a cultural program for Phule. Education becomes a cultural program for Ambedkar, where education does not remain just a kind of job-seeking kinds of adventure where you are trying to become careerist, you are trying to seek a jobs and things like that. You are trying to emancipate the sense, and that becomes the idea of the education, and that gets quite ingrained here. So, and here you have very remarkable observation by Gramsci, where he's saying that why to talk about new culture but now new art. So he's making clear differences between that. So he's discussing about so he's discussing about that two spaces. One is about the formation production of new culture, and second is the production of the new art. And he's saying that, so his argument is that one should speak of a struggle for a new culture and not for a new art in the immediate sense. It is not that you cannot talk later, but you can talk later. But yes, again, to repeat the point, one should speak of a struggle for a new culture and not for the new art. To fight for a new art would mean to create a new individual artist, which is absurd since artists cannot be created artificially. One must speak of a struggle for a new culture, that is for a new moral life that cannot be but intimately connected to a new institution of life until it becomes a new way of feeling and seeing reality, and therefore a world intimately grand in possible artists and possible works of art. So he's clearly saying that we first let us come to this new culture, and that new cultures will bring this possibility of new art. What is happening in contemporary, in many art, in many fields of performances, that there is a whole emphasis on creating new art. In literature, you have a lot of movement that happen around literature, where there is a whole emphasis of new art. But new art cannot survive, and new art generally remains within the part of the gallery. It's not able to make larger kinds of connection with the society in that sense, unless we are not talking about the production of new culture. I think this whole idea of the production of a new art also becomes quite impossible. And this is precisely my problem with many of the contemporary art and literature that I can talk about. Finally, so I think how much time we have, Rasika?
We do have a couple of minutes. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
About
So
5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. So I'm going to take 10 minutes.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah. So coming back to the Ross explanation, Andrew Ross explanation, where he's suggesting that doing justice to culture. So it is not you are just doing culture justice to society, you are doing justice to human being. You also need to do justice to the culture, because our culture itself remains enslaved. So debates around economic, political, and social justice is well recognized in India. More specifically, social justice has played a significant role in shaping of contemporary legal, political, and larger discourse of social political life. And therefore, so therefore we need to constantly talk about cultivating justice. So culturally, when we are talking about doing justice to culture, then just let me come. So I take doing justice to culture in three broad sense. First, by bringing marginalized and neglected aspect of culture at the forefront. So when you are bringing the marginalized and neglected aspects of culture, you are doing justice to the culture. Second, one is also doing justice to the culture because culture itself remains enslaved in a larger discourse of caste, gender, and racial oppression. Third, relates to doing justice to culture as a cultural activist and educator. And therefore, I also would like to time and again, I'm coming back to this idea of the activist approach in which we can think about this idea of the cultural justice, because third relates to doing justice to culture as a cultural activist and educator. And recently, a very brilliant writing by Clemmer, where he's saying that where a group is excluded, when you know that a group is excluded and its cultural expression denigrated or ignored, it is clearly the role of the cultural activist to protest, to draw attention to this process of marginalization, and to help the community formulate good arguments about why the culture should be recognized and respected. And this role is going to be done by cultural activists or educators. We don't have that, we cannot make that kinds of distinction also. Another, you have very that kinds of many times when we discuss about Ambedkar philosophy or Ambedkar's idea of justice, then largely the his idea of the justice remains very exclusive to think about either political justice or social justice. But I think one of the things that has not got that kinds of emphasis or that kinds of reading is this when he's talking about liberty, equality, and fraternity. then what is the fraternity he's talking about? Of course, like there has been a lot of work around his understanding of a spiritualism, the religious kinds of discourses, or New Buddhism in that sense. But I think when we think about his idea of the fraternity, I would like to read as the idea of the cultural justice, and I would like to quote him that he says that what I mean by why. So he's saying that you have criticized me that because I am quite venomous, always venomous, that I keep criticizing the Hindu society. So let me become constructive. And he says that so why cannot we have fraternity? Let us talk about fraternity, and we should all have fraternity. And he says when he's talking about fraternity, he says that an ideal society should be mobile, should be full of channels for conveying a change taking place in part to the other parts, one part to the other parts. In an ideal society, there should be many interests consciously communicated and shared. There should be a varied and free points of contact with other modes of association. In other words, there must be a social endosmosis. This is a fraternity, which is only another name for democracy. Democracy is not merely a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoined communicated experiences. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards fellow men. And this is what I think, that if you are thinking through this idea of the cultural and social justice, then we can have a very different kinds of reading, but it comes more towards when he's discussing about also this whole idea of endosmosis. And when you think about this term endosmosis, then endosmosis indicates free movement of water inside the cell. And that is what he realized, that you don't have free movement of water inside the cells of the caste society. And therefore, when you are thinking through this idea of that, even his idea of freedom to life and limb. So one can understand that one is talking about life, but why he's also talking about limb? What is this limb indicating towards? And therefore, I have this whole plan to also to engage his idea, his notion of the cultural justice, to theorize this larger framework of the cultural justice in that sense. Another part is so first I have discussed that doing justice to the culture, now pursuing justice through cultural means. And this is a very obvious kinds of connection one can make, that when I'm discussing about cultural justice, then I'm also thinking about pursuing justice through cultural means, because our symbols. So if you go to the South India, what you will find that many of the deities who are coming largely from the lower caste and subaltern communities, they are largely in lockup, in chain. And if you're going to read their agency, what is the agency of these deities? And you will find that what you are exactly doing by controlling these deities, are putting these deities in lockup. And if you're going to read these symbols, if you're going to read this formation, then we are going to unearth this whole idea of the cultural injustices prevalent in our society, and therefore pursuing justice through culture means how we can change the symbols, how we can change the metaphors. And I was giving you examples. So recently I was wrote one paper also on Phulan Devi, where you have new songs that has come up, very fascinating songs, in which people are celebrating the birth of Phulan Devi in a society where birth of girl is generally considered very inauspicious. So when Phulan Devi is born, then cloud is coming dancing, forest is moving a dancing move, they're singing and all these things. So how you have some kinds of certain kinds of utopia is getting created, and therefore we can also discuss about utopia, because even if we're discussing about work of Bill Umbet, and then she's saying that you have postmodernists and elite scholars, they can give up this whole idea of the utopia, but as a social activist and cultural activist, we cannot give up the whole idea of the utopia. Unless you don't have utopia, you cannot fight these kinds of injustices. And therefore, when I'm discussing about pursuing justice to the cultural means, then that how we are going to use certain kinds of symbols. And I will give one example to make this larger connection. So you have Meghdootam, many of you have read Meghdootam by Kalidas, where you have cloud messenger, is making a kinds of movement from one part to the other parts, in seeing the beauties around, seeing the landscape around, making the kinds of seeing the dance of the Apsaras and things. Against that Meghdootam, you have wonderful text by Gurram Joshiwa, who wrote in Telugu, considered first Dalit, modern Dalit poet, and he wrote Gabilam, and Gabilam can be translated as a bat messenger. In the preface of the book, and I will end with this quote. So he wrote, I wrote this text by keeping Kalidas Meghdootam in mind and chose Gabilam, bat as the title. For some readers, it might sound harsh, but the protagonist in Meghdootam sends a message of love. My protagonist sends a searing, poignant message. The protagonist in Meghdootam was sentenced in to 1 year when he was not able to meet his lover. But my hero was sentenced from birth. from generation without an end. The hero in the Meghdut was a Hindu cupid suffering from a burning desire to meet his lover. My hero is a victim of poverty that burns his stomach. That is why he says, even to hear my cheerful story, one needs a soft heart. And that is what I am trying to indicate toward this idea of the cultural justice, that to hear the cultural justice, you need to have a soft heart. Unless you don't have that kind of sensibility, I think this whole idea of the cultural justice is not going to work. And with this, things and provocation. And so, yeah, so there is one section where I'm discussing about education. Education is a culture program. Another section where I'm providing a criticism to this whole idea of the cultural diversity, cultural pluralism, like multiculturalism, where like cultural justice is discussed in a quite, I would say, in a very celebratory mode. So thank you so much, Rasika, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you everyone for like having a great patience.